everybody, and welcome back to another watercolor segment with Laurel Hart. In the last tutorial that we filmed, we talked about success and failure as artists. And I wanted to follow up, sharing with you what was a painting that I did years and years ago that has some very obvious problems to it. And I thought it might be kind of fun to show you some of the things that I would do if I were to paint that painting again, how I would correct those things. I did this from a little magazine advertisement. I cut it out and painted this figure. And there are a ton of things that I can see here that are really bugging me about this particular painting. And I'll kind of explain what those are. I went through my my reference photos. I think that painting this one will be very similar to this pose that I took this painting from. I like the fact that this particular model is already in a white dress, so I can kind of give you a comparison to that. And she's carrying something, and she's got the hat on as well, and kind of a downward tip of her head. But let's talk about this painting for a minute and some of the things that I have learned now to correct that I don't like about this painting any longer. First of all, I would like to address the subject of the color. The color is very dead in this painting, and the reason it is, for one thing, it's a little bit too mixed, and particularly it's mixed too much on the palette, so that it's already into this kind of dead color before it's even gotten onto the paper. And so that's why it is, it's really not a very lively color. The other thing that I'd like to talk about regarding this little piece is the color is much too washed out in most of the painting. Even in the darks, I don't think that they have as much of a punch as they probably could have. The color in these flowers is very, very washed out. And same with the shadows on her dress. The color down here in the grass, it's very dead. And I think for the most part that was from using very dry watercolors that were not wet down and moist enough. And also that I didn't do enough mixing, or I did too much mixing on the palette as I came onto my paper with it. Another problem with this painting, the model does not relate at all to the background. In other words, it's like she's one part of the painting and the background is another part of the painting, and they don't mix with each other at all. What I'm trying to say is she looks like she is, I've used this term a lot before, she looks like she is cut out and then pasted down onto the background. And that is a very common mistake with, I think, artists a lot, that they don't think about relating or connecting the figure to the background. And so it fragments the painting and makes the figure look like it doesn't really belong, or the background doesn't belong. So I would help that by pulling some of this color somewhere on the model into the background so that those two things connect in some way and relate to each other better than that. Also, another problem that I see is having things in this painting that compete with what I would say is the center of interest. And that would be, I would say, these branches over here. These are not important to the story. And so they should be subdued more. They shouldn't be that prominent, because when you look at this figure, to me, your eyes are getting pulled right over into this branchy stuff here, which pulls you away from the figure and adds a conflict that doesn't need to be there. Let me see if there's anything else that I hate about this painting. Well, one thing, the skin tones, they're terribly blah and very, very cold. And I think I would make those much more warm and colorful than I have in here. And maybe you have some other things that you can think of too that don't work quite well in this painting, but those are probably the main things for me. The grass too is a little bit too prominent. I think it should have had some flowing into the middle ground or the background as well. So anyway, I am going to try to show you how I would redo this particular model, although it will be a very close second choice, pretty much the same as far as the clothing and the color that she's wearing and the gesture. So I'm going to try to paint this for you and hopefully be able to fix some of those problems that have occurred in this painting from a long time ago. So let's get started. I am going to be working on, actually, I can't tell you for sure if this is Winsor Newton or if it's Lana Quarel. To me, they're quite similar papers, and I'm honestly not sure which one I picked up. So it's one of the two in 140-pound weight, cold press. My brushes, as usual, are my set of low Cornells. I've got from an 8 going up to a 14, but those of you who have watched my demos know that I'll generally just probably use those two sizes, the 8 and maybe the 10. The other brushes that I have here are my my Squirrel Mops by Winsor Newton, a size 1 and 2, and these are very good for really holding a lot of water and pulling a lot of water onto the page for me. My palette is over here. I wanted to make a comment on this palette. I've had a lot of people comment and ask where I got this palette, and I honestly don't know. I've had it for so long. I have 2 of them, but they don't have any brand name on them. But the other day I saw an ad from Cheap Joe's that they were bringing back what they called their original palette, and it was about this very same size, and it had 17 wells. This one has 20, but it's very similar, and it was only $9.99 for a certain time. So if that's of interest, you could check there with them and find that same palette if you're interested in it. I'll be using my regular triad of colors, starting with manganese blue, permanent alizarin crimson. Many of you have asked me why I use alizarin crimson, because it's fugitive, but it's permanent alizarin, so it is a permanent color. And then I will be using yellow ochre to start in this first triad. And what I'm going to try to do is start by not treating the background separately from the model. I'm going to try to include both of these things together. So I'll get started with, first of all, my mop. And I'm going to bring in a puddle of yellow ochre. I need to get some paper towels here. And then a nice juicy puddle of manganese blue. I'd like you to notice, for one thing, some of you have said it's hard to tell how much water I'm using. But I want you to notice that, first of all, my paints are all sprayed down beforehand, and they're very wet and very moist. So I've got them already softened and ready to go when I come in to start painting. So that's an important thing that I think you need to maybe consider if you're painting in this method, to keep your paint soft and wet. If you come in with just really cake, hard, dry paints, this is the look you're going to get. And if you like it, fine, but I am really not happy with this color in that painting. So alizarin crimson here. There we go. Get a nice puddle of that. And then once again, I'm going to just start with these colors coming in onto dry paper. Okay, so I'm going to just start back behind this woman, and I'm going to leave some of this hat cut out because it is an area that I'm going to want to have as sort of the main feature in the painting. So there are some areas where I am going to consciously want to have a hard edge. Okay. So that's why I'm doing that. And I'm going to pull right back into the hat here where there is this beautiful blue shadow. I'm going to get that in right now, and I am going to keep that pretty pure pigment there. When I've got some areas that have a band of light, like right here and right here, I can use those as stopping points in my wash. So in other words, I can end there, and it's not going to be a problem when I come back in because I'm going to want a little band of light there anyway. And you're probably going to notice already that I have not gone into the red yet. And I think that's going to be because this stuff behind her is going to be foliage. Now, what I want to point out over here, and I'm going to switch back to a little bit smaller brush now. I'm going to go to my number 8 of the low Cornells. And this is the shadow side of this woman. And so I am going to let that bleed into my background here and not make a differentiation between that sleeve and where this bleeds out into the background. Okay. I want to get some of the flesh tone in there, but not that strong. And I'm also going to take a touch of dark that is not really in my triad at this point and put her hair in here so that it can kind of bleed back into that little veil that's hanging back behind her neck there. But I want that not to have a really hard edge there. Okay. And then this is all in shadow over here, so, but the veil is catching a little bit of light on it, so I want to leave that. I can see some really kind of pretty pink in there though. And I don't know if I'm going to really want a hard edge there. Kind of spoils things when you have this historical costume and then you've got computer equipment back here in the background, but oh well. Okay, so I'm going to keep working down on this this figure, and here we've got this really pretty shadow coming across there. And again, remember that that whites in shadow still have color to them. They can be very colorful. But when we get done here, it's still going to hopefully read as a white dress that she's wearing. And then she's got some little brochure or something in her hand that she's reading. So I'm just going to put a little light tone on that. And so, as I said, there are some places on here where I am going to want a nice crisp edge, and this is one of them right along here. I think she's got a neck. I can't tell if that's a necklace or I'm not sure. I think she's got some pearls on or something there. Okay, and then I don't want that to just be an isolated thing there either, so I'm going to continue to come down on her dress with these same tones again. Gathering a little bit more color as I go, because that's pretty much in shadow through there. And pay attention to the reflected light. I see how much yellow you can see in that underneath her sleeve there. That was another thing that I should have pointed out on the original painting, is that white in shadow has a lot of color in it, generally speaking. I should catch that little shadow edge coming right under there too. And then again, I don't want a separation between the bag there and the skirt. Plus, again, this is the shadow side, and I do want to carry that out into the background. So she's living in the background rather than being placed on top of the background. But you can see, you guys, that I am I'm adding these colors sometimes individually onto the paper and letting them do the work. See how they're blending and making all this beautiful color. And right now it may look like it's a little bit too much color, but I don't think it's going to be in the end. There's just these beautiful, beautiful warms in here that I think can really benefit from being overstated. I think sometimes that's a characteristic of watercolor that we have to keep in mind, that for one thing, it dries a little bit light anyway, so it's usually probably a little better to overstate than understate, I've found. I want to make sure and leave some of that white there. Okay, I want to pull her feet out of there too. That was burnt umber and ultramarine blue that I just dipped into to make a really nice dark here for her shoes. And a lot of you ask me about the drawing. I did freehand this one on. And here's where I can indicate a little bit of detail where her shoes are actually in the grass. So see how I'm kind of trying to indicate that. Okay, and I want to pick back up onto the bag there a little bit before that dries and leaves a hard edge there. And that shadow on the bag is almost kind of a greenish gray. So I just created that with a mixture of the yellow ochre and the manganese blue. And out here, I'm not going to try to put in those boxes, but I am going to try to maybe put in that tone a little bit in front of that okay, and then down into the grass. I'm not going to use a package or tube green. I'm going to use the manganese and actually a little brighter yellow. I'm going to do cadmium yellow to and I want that even a little brighter. of a yellow, because that's all out in the sun there. I can always tone that back down, but if I go too dark to start with, I'm not going to be able to recapture it. So I'm going to leave it a little bit brighter than maybe it's going to end up at the end. And that's cadmium yellow. And okay, you might be kind of getting worried that I've got this blossom happening here, but I'm not that worried about it. This paper, both the Lana and the Winsor Newton, are really pretty good at letting you soften those blossom things out. You can see the figure coming to life a little bit more as I begin to put some of that background in. It's pushing her forward, and then you can see how easily this paper will let me lift these transparent colors. I can almost go right back to white. And then while this is wet down underneath here, I want to get the little bit of shadow coming in between her feet there. Maybe make that have a little bit of purple in it. I'll just let that bleed into there. And I can start kind of carving in some of these folds in her skirt here. Pulling some of those out a little bit, so it gives it a little motion to her walking. I don't want to do too much. I don't want it to compete with the really pretty white that is on the edge of her skirt and dress. But already, to me, she has a lot more life and breathing than this other figure that I did so long ago. So while I let this bottom dry, I don't have my blow dryer with me, and I really should let this get completely dry. I'll skip back up here to the top and work a little bit on this background behind her. And what I'm going to do is, now that this is dry, I'm going to wet this behind her And then I'm going to just float in some of these shadows and try to bring that foliage in very loosely and not have these really hard edges like I've got here that are calling attention away from the model. So I'm going to wet up to the edge of her hat and this edge of her shoulder, where I am going to really want a nice hard edge there, because that's the focal point of the story, really, right there, coming down through here. And this time I'm going to move into a darker blue. I'm going to go into the indanthrene blue that I've started using, and a lot of you have commented that telling me I'm spelling it wrong, but there's actually two different versions of it. There's an indanthrone and an indanthrene, but it is the same blue. The brand that I have happens to be the indanthrene, and I think it's the Winsor Newton brand. Okay, so I'm going to mix that with also some really nice bright cadmium. That'll give me some really pretty greens back in here, but now watch as that comes forward, as that pushes her shoulder forward. And starts to really make that work. I'm going to add in some transparent oxide red as well. And that'll give you kind of a really nice olive green. Floating in. As I float in the cadmiums, that kind of makes the effect of the foliage in the sunlight. So I'm just letting those flow onto the paper, but you saw that I still included some of the that was my ultramarine. Some of the original components of the triad. I kept some of the pink going in. And if I want, I can pull out, some highlights of leaves or whatever with my paper towel or using my brush. So it can give it a little bit of dimension that way as well. And then I want to make sure and pick up the bead at the bottom so that I'm not going to get blossoms back up into that. Although I don't always mind blossoms. There's kind of a shadow over in here, it's looking like. But don't you think this is much more pleasing than this, where I've got a soft edge and a soft diffused look to the background here, rather than this hard, dry ugliness. I told you last week not to be so hard on yourselves, and look what I'm doing to myself. Oh well. So that's leaving it much more abstract, and I think that's probably what I'm trying to get at, is the background should, at least in this particular subject, stay in the background and be a complement to the model rather than competing with it like it's doing in this older painting. And then we've got some really nice darks over in here too. Boy, I'm getting some unmixed paint in here. I don't know why that is. And dipping back into that transparent oxide red to just add a little warmth into that green. And what I want to do here now, picking back up my smaller brush, now I want to work back into my manganese blue and pull this background now into her shoulder a little deeper color. So her shoulder is getting lost now into that background, and see how pretty that is? It just gives such a nice softness. And interest there. Let's pretend there's some bushes of some sort back there. And I am using my original triad, but I'm kind of doing it a little bit piecemeal. I've got all those other dark colors on my palette now, so I'm kind of having to be a little creative with my original colors there. As you can see, I've kind of got them interspersed here, but they still are that triad. And then I maybe even want to set this off just a little bit more back in here. And I'll just let that bleed back in there and just come right down into her arm, and not really make a hard distinction between this side of her and the background. And same down in here. That should all be a little bit darker on the skirt here. This right in here really is the grass reflecting up there into her dress, so I'm going to put some green up in there. And it makes it much more unified with the rest of the picture. I still feel like there is a little bit more of a dark green back in here. Pretty much comes up to that veil there, doesn't it? This should have a little bit of a softer edge there, I think. Then I'm going to kind of reverse process down here for the grass behind her. And I said I wasn't really going to put these boxes in, but I do like that there's just some shapes there. And I've kind of left myself without my white that I tried to leave there, this little thing on top of the box, but I'll try pulling that out. Let's see if we can still pull a little bit of the light out. can kind of see whatever that is. Now, okay, so I've got a dark over in here I want to get in. And this is sort of the same tone over here as over here, so I'm just going to get that in. I still want a much darker tone or value in here to really push her shoulder forward. I've got what looks like just a light back through here, and kind of on top of that box. And I'll do a little bit of painting behind here too. Look like that's a bush or something back there. Can see that I've missed my value on the shadow there. That's darker. And it actually comes to the bottom of the hat there. I still feel like with her face in the shadow there, I think that's, she would have a darker skin tone under there. And then a little bit more over here. Now you can kind of see that she's got that necklace on. And right here, I feel like we need a bit of dark. But so now you can see that there are places where I've tried to let the model breathe off into the background, which allows your eye to move a little more freely throughout the painting. There's more that I would do to this, but I think the idea is there. So for now, I'm going to have to call it quits. I'll work some more on this another time, but I think you get the idea that there are some common mistakes that are made in paintings, and they can easily be overcome. I think that this finished piece, it's not really finished yet, but I think that you can feel that it's much more alive, much more colorful, has a much softer feel to it, where the eye can move around the painting and the model is connected in and out to the background, and the background is not conflicting too much with her. I hope you've enjoyed being with me for this segment. Thank you for letting me share one of my failed paintings, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you for being with me. Bye-bye.